So likewise, Bob has its public key and private key, and Charlie also has it. So this is the setup. They're going to use RSA. Then they also need to make agreement that they will use the same hash function. Let's call it H. Okay, so that's going to so that's what it's needed. Then now let's look at what this dual signature scheme is about. So let's start our video. We first look at what Alice does. So Alice calculates the following values. Okay, this is a purchase order. And this purchase order will be encrypted using Bob's public key so that only Bob can see it. Okay, nobody else has Bob's private key, so nobody can decrypt this. And then Alice signs her payment info. Alice used Charlie's public key to encrypt this payment information, not signing, just encrypting. Okay, so basically what Alice does is encrypt I1 purchase order using Bob's public key, encrypt the payment information using credit card companies or Charlie's public key. So we call that SB and SC. So take the hash value of SB and the hash value of HC. So we call it HB, small hc. And then we take the hash value again on both of them. So we concatenate HB and HC, take the hash. This time, Alice signs it. So Alice signs this hash so that these two purchase order are linked together. So Alice signs it using her private key. So we call that dual signature, DS. Okay, so Alice then sends this encrypted I1, encrypted I2, and the dual signature to Bob. Okay, and then she will wait for a receipt RB from Bob. And then she can then, because this receipt is signed using Alice's public key, so Alice can decrypt it and see that her payments, her purchase is complete, and then she will be waiting for her shipment. Okay, now let's see what Bob does. So Bob will get, let me, excuse me. So Bob gets SB, SC, and its dual signature from Alice. Okay, so Alice sends this to Bob. Now remember, SB is the encrypted purchase order using Bob's public key. And SC is the encrypted payment information using Charlie's public key. And DS is a dual signature, which Alice signs it using her private key. So this is on a hash of HBHC. That links the purchase order to the payment information. Okay, so that's what this DS is. Now, so what Bob will do is to compare, oops, I think I should not. Okay, so so this is DS. So let me bring up this annotation. Okay, so Bob will first using Bob will first verify this is Alice's signature by Alice's public key. So then Bob can get H of H, B, H, C. Okay, so then because Bob gets SB and SC as well, so then he will compare with this to see whether these two are the same. Okay, if they are the same, then Bob knows that this request, so this message, that's indeed come from Alice. So then Bob can decrypt, okay, SB, okay, using his private key. So then you get purchase order. So after Bob gets the purchase order, he will then send the same thing again. Send what he receives to Charlie. So this is the same. DS to Charlie. And waits for Charlie's receipt and saying that he will get payment. Okay, so, and after that, so after that payment information, approval information, then Bob then will decrypt RC and verify it is indeed coming from Charlie. And then he will then send a receipt to Alice and saying that the purchase payment received, the order is complete, and tell Alice to wait for shipment. That's what Bob does. Okay. So now let's look at what Charlie would do. So Charlie gets, remember, Charlie gets the same. So this is from Bob. So that now these purchase order and payments information are linked. Okay. So then basically what Charlie does is exactly the same. So verifies this indeed comes from Alice, like Bob does. And then Charlie will decrypt the second part to get I2. So that's the credit card information. So if and then it checks to see whether Alice really is a legitimate person of that credit card information. If it is, and Bob will, I'm sorry, Charlie then will execute a proper payment transaction and send a receipt to Bob and saying that payment is on the way. Payment's been approved, it's on the way, and then Bob decrypts this. Okay, using so this is encrypted. So Bob will use his private key to decrypt this and get this, and then verify this indeed comes from Charlie using Charlie's public key. So once that payment information is verified, then Bob will send a receipt to Alice and saying that the payment is received. And purchase order is done and shipment will be made. All right. That is dual signature. Now we're going to look at another signature scheme called blind signature. We are going to look at blind signatures and electronic cash today. This is the last chapter this is the last section in chapter 4. First of all, what is blind signature? Well, blind signatures are a technique that allows someone to sign something without seeing it. What that means here is that, let's say I have a document M, and I want a signer to sign M. That means putting his signature on it. But I don't want the signer to see what M is. So this is a blind signature. Blind signature has an important application in electronic cash. So blind signature can be realized using RSA. So here is how we use RSA to generate a blind signature. So here you can see I have a message M, and that's the message M I want the signer to sign. And the signer has a set of RSA keys. Of course, N is one of them, E and D. So E is public key, and D is the private key, and the signer uses D to sign this message M. So this is what I want. I want the signer to provide M to the D's power, my N to me, because that is his signature on M. But I don't want the signer to see M. So the idea then is I am going to hide M inside another message, M sub R in this case, by using a blind factor R. So that blind factor R, which is less than N, is an integer such that R and N are relatively prime. Okay, so because R and N are relatively prime, the inverse of R, mod N, exists. So I'm going to use R to hide this M inside another message. Okay, so if you look at here, I am encrypting R using RSA. Okay, so this part is encryption of R. And what I'm really doing is to obtain the multiplication of m and r to the east power mod n. Okay, so that's mr. So I present this mr to the signer. The signer doesn't, the signer won't be able to see what m is. So I present mr to the signer. Signer signs the mr, which means that signer will carry out this calculation. So, so this is raise mr to the dth power and take the modular. And the signature on mr is s sub r. Now remember, we can use fast exponentiation algorithm to compute this efficiently. So then the blind factor r is included in the signature. So we need to remove it from the signature. So this is done as follows. So we multiply m inverse mod n with SR. So that is equivalent to removing R, blind factor R, from this signature F sub R to get S sub M, which is this. So that's exactly what I need. Here is a quick proof how it works. I'm going to write this proof down in a separate video after this. Okay. So now let's continue on this topic. So let's look at how we use blind signatures in electronic cash. So first of all, to come up with a protocol for electronic cash, we first look at what properties we would really like to achieve. So first look at, in general, what key properties real cash should have. So I have 4 bullets here. One is anonymousness. The other one is changing hands. The third is that cash of certain values can be divided into smaller values. And of course, it has to be very difficult to counterfeit using all sorts of technology, such as hidden images, sequence numbers, special kinds of inks, and high quality paper, that sort of counterfeit technology on cash. So the question then is, can these properties be duplicated with some sort of electronic cash protocol? So before we talk about actual implementation, so let's see what an ideal electronic cash protocol should have. And what we really like a electronic cash protocol to have is the following. Number one, anonymous and untraceable, or anonymousness and untraceability, which means that you don't know who owns that particular cash bill, right? You don't know who owns that $100 bill. Of course, when you change hands, you cannot trace it's a prior owner, that kind of thing. And it should be convenient. We know that electronic cash are used to pay for something, but you can also give electronic cash to somebody without really offering any products or services in return. And it has to be non-replicable, meaning that you cannot only, only one copy can be used, right? So this is electronic cash, so it's easy to make a copy of it, but only one copy can be used. And it's transferable, because it's easy to understand. You can give this copy to somebody else, and that person can use it as its cash. And the last one is dividable. It can be divided into smaller values. So these are ideal properties of an electronic cash protocol that we really like it to have. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't have any protocol that can provide all of these properties. So what we are going to look at is a protocol named Ecash. This protocol was devised in 1980s, in the 1980s, which satisfies many of the most important properties that we outlined earlier. In particular, it uses blind signatures to ensure anonymousness and untraceability. So here's how it works. Let B, capital B, denote a financial institution. For example, denote a bank. And let B's RSA keys be N, D, and E. Again, N is a product of two prime numbers, and E is a private key, such that E is relatively prime to phi of N, and D is the inverse of E, modular phi of N, meaning D times E is congruent to 1, modular phi of N. Okay, so now suppose Alice wants to buy an Ecash dollar. So what Alice would do is the following. First, she generates a sequence number M at random. So this could be a random number she generates or follows on certain protocols she only to herself. So she generates a sequence number M, and that number is going to represent the Ecash dollars she's going to buy. Then she uses a blind factor R to blind M. Okay, so this R is a random number. And what she does is to compute M times R to the E's power mod N. Let's call it X. So in effect, this sequence number, small m, was included in this X, okay? But of course, anybody who sees X won't be able to know what M is without knowing what R is. Okay, now E and N, of course, are public. So Alice then sends X and her account number in the bank to the bank B. So B verifies that Alice does indeed have an account with B, and B will charges $1 from Alice's bank account plus some processing fee, and then signs X, okay, and send it to Alice. So then this X, which is a signature, we call it Y, is what Alice has. But then Alice needs to remove this R from Z. Okay, so what she does is to multiply inverse of R with Y. So this is equivalent to removing R. What she gets is M to the D's power mod N. So this is this sequence number now has bank's endorsement because the bank B signs it. So that means finally, Alice gets her Ecash dollar, M comma Z. Z is M to the D modular M. So then, of course, Alice can use this E dollar to buy things or simply give to someone or whatever, right? So let's say B gets this Ecash from Alice, okay? And so what Bob, let's say Bob has this Ecash. Once this M comma Z is in Bob's hand, of course, nobody else would know. This comes from Alice because there's in no way there's any things left on this M and Z, okay? And obviously the bank doesn't know what, who creates this M either, because when the bank signs it, the bank doesn't see M. What he sees is X, okay? So he doesn't see M. So nobody knows who created M, and nobody knows the prior owner of M, okay? So now Bob is the current owner. Let's say Bob wants to redeem this Ecash dollar. So what he does is to send this M comma Z to the bank and saying, hey, I want to cash this Ecash dollar. And the bank verifies this M that's indeed endorsed by the bank by checking its signature. And then he gets, and then he needs to check to see whether this M has been cashed before. Okay, so if it has not been cashed, then the bank will consider this Ecash dollar valid and record M in its database, indicating that this has been cashed. And then, of course, credit Bob's account by $1. So as you can see here, blind signature is used to make sure anonymousness of Ecash dollar and untraceability. So there's a problem here. Well, actually we can think of several problems, but we can at least think of two in this particular case. The first problem is that since it is easy to duplicate this Ecash dollar M comma Z, okay? Let's say Bob has it and Alice also makes a copy and sends it to Charlie, for instance. And then, of course, let's say Bob is a legitimate person, but Charlie isn't. So the question then is, how can Bob stop Charlie from redeeming that cash, $E cash, before he does? Okay, so that is the first question that I would like you to think about. The second question is, how can we divide a Ecash dollar into smaller values? Okay, so that's another question. But nevertheless, using blind signatures in electronic cash ensures unanimousness and untraceability, which is one of the most important properties that cash should have. Okay, that's it for today for this topic. We're going to move on to the next topic. So what I am going to show you here on the on the whiteboard is to remove blind factor in RSA. So this is how to remove a blind factor using RSA. So to make things easier, I assume that I have a signer. And signer has his public key, EN, and also it has its private key, DN. Okay, so we know that we know that N is a product of two prime numbers, P and Q, PQ prime numbers. And we know that E and phi of N is equal to 1. GCD of E and phi of N is equal to 1, which means that E and phi of N are relatively prime. And we also know that phi of N is equal to P minus 1 times Q minus 1. Moreover, we know that ED is congruent to 1 mod phi of N. That means D is the inverse mod phi of N. So that's what signer has. So let's say I has a message M. What I want, okay, I want the signer to sign to sign M. So I want M to the D mod N. Okay, I call this S sub M. But without the signer seeing what M is. So that's what I want. So now what I do is to generate a random number R, which is less than N. Of course, it would be a pseudo-random number, okay? We know that, right? So when we say whatever, when we generate a random number, in our case, it will be a number generated by a pseudo-random number generator. So this R is my blind factor, which is a blind factor. Okay. So I want a high M inside another message. So this other message is M sub R, which is equal to M times R to the E's power mod N. Okay, as you can see here, R to the E's power mod N is really an encryption of R using RSA. So from MR, you won't be able to see M without knowing what R is, right? So from M sub R, the signer won't be able to see M without knowing R. Okay, so of course, this random number R has to be kept secret, okay, to me, okay, I'll keep it secret. So now I present M sub R to the signer. Okay, the signer signs it. So what I get, let's say, is S sub R, which is MR to the D's power mod N. This is the signer signs M sub R. So now I need to remove the blind factor, which is R, from F sub R to obtain S sub M, which is equal to M to the D's power mod N. So that's what I want. So now we need to do a little number theory stuff. Okay, so first of all, we know, so this is the first bullet. Since GCD E comma phi of N is equal to 1. And then, I'm sorry. Let's go back earlier. So when I create this blind factor, R, this R has to be, so this R has to be relatively prime to N. Okay, so we generate a random number R with, so let me put it in here, with GCD R comma N equal to 1. So let me put N here, indicate I want this random number R. So this means that I'm going to change this. Since GCD R and N is equal to 1. By Euler's theorem, we have R to the phi of N is congruent to 1 by n. So that is the first fact we have. All right. The second half, we know that since E times D is congruent to 1 mod phi of n, this means there exists an integer k such that E times D is equal to 1 plus k times phi of n. So that's ED. So now I can find out m sub r to the d's power mod n is equal to m times r to the e's power then to the d's power mod n. So d distributes in, we get m to the d's power r to the ed then mod n. So then this is really equal to md times r. So ed is equal to 1 plus k phi of n. So we get 1 plus k phi of n mod n. So that really is md times r. So the second component is r to the k times phi of n mod n. Okay. So that really is equal to m to the d's power times r phi of n k mod n. This is equal to md times r. So r to the phi of n mod n is 1 by Euler's theorem. So that is 1 to the k's power mod n. 1 to the k's power is 1. So what we are getting is md times r mod n. So that is Sm. So I'm sorry, F sub r. So if we multiply r inverse modulo n, then this is equal to m to the d's power times r inverse mod n. R inverse becomes 1, so which we get m to the d mod n, and that is m sub m, the signature we really want to get from the signer. Okay, that's it. So it's how we can remove a blind factor using RSA. So now we are going to look at cryptographic currency. Okay, so Bitcoin in particular. So which is not Ecash, but it's just a game. Video is Bitcoin. Last time we talked about blind signatures and its use in creating a Ecash protocol. In that protocol, we use blind signatures to achieve anonymousness and untraceability for an electronic cash. And today we are going to look at a related topic. So this is a related topic in the sense, this topic is related in the sense that we are talking about cryptographic currency, which is different from electronic cash. Okay, we talked about last time, but again, it is related to money, right? So this is in a digital form. We call it, some people call it digital currency. Some other people call it cryptographic currency. And here we use Bitcoin to look at this issue. Since the Bitcoin, there are other digital currencies available, but they are more or less based on the same technique of something called blockchain. Okay, now let's look at what a Bitcoin is. First of all, Bitcoin is a game, is a network game, or it's a distributed game played by many people. So that really means that Bitcoin is a network protocol, and it can be viewed as a mining game where players are rewarded for successes with prizes called Bitcoins. Right? So you play the game, you won, you win, and it will be awarded with a prize, and that prize is called a Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin is hard to get, and so you can really think of this prize. You can use this prize as currency, and to get some real values for it. Well, of course, it has to be people are willing. It has to be the case that some people are willing to connect Bitcoins to real values in the real world. Okay, different from Ecash, Bitcoin is a decentralized currency. Okay, there is no bank involved. There is no government involved. Okay, so this is important for this form of a currency. The other one is that it is a game, so it uses a group of cooperating players to form a P2P network, and that network is called a Bitcoin network. Okay. So in particular, the Bitcoin network maintains a global distributed ledger, shorthand for it is GDL, of transactions. Okay, and that this global distributed ledger of transactions, then is called a blockchain. So that's what really a blockchain is. And Bitcoin signs individual transactions instead of a particular Bitcoin, because we know that Bitcoin is simply a prize to a player who is successful on certain tasks. Okay, so then of course the signature is really on transactions, not on the awards. Okay, now let's look at Bitcoin transaction signing. sorry. Suppose that Alice wants to pay Bob a number of Bitcoins, let's say C units of Bitcoins. So what she needs to do is to collect transactions she owns from GDL or from the blockchain. That sums up to at least C units of Bitcoins. So that sum up to at least C units of Bitcoin. So of course she needs to own them first, owns these transactions. Then she signs this transaction, and that is then called a transaction record, which lists Bob, represented by his payment address, as the receiver of C units of Bitcoins from Alice. And this transaction then is broadcast in the Bitcoin network. Okay, so that's been put back into the ledger. The payment address is a function of Bob's public key. Okay, so since everybody can sign up for the game, and you don't really need to reveal your true identity. So what you are using is your public key, and of course that public key should link to you. So what people sees is some public key and some ID, right? So then you can receive a certain amount of Bitcoins from others. Now, what is a transaction record? Now, once again, the blockchain is a ledger, is a global distributed ledger, which basically is a chain of transactions linked by each other. So now we need to know what a transaction looks like. So a transaction record becomes a new item in the blockchain, which consists of the following components. Number one, a list of transactions destined to Alice that sum to at least C units. These transactions are nines in the blockchain, okay, are nines in the GDL. Okay, so this is the ledger. So this is a list of transactions, and the second component is a hash of each transaction Alice is going to use for payment. So for each transaction, there is a hash value. And the third component is the payment address for Bob. As we know, that payment address is a function of Bob's public key. And for this component, it comes with the amount of Bitcoins to be paid to Bob. So it would be C units in our example. The payment address for Alice, with how much change Alice should receive from the transaction. Right? So these transactions are owned by Alice, and since now they are paid to Bob, then of course Alice will own less, right, by the amount of what she pays to Bob. The above items are hashed, so all of these items are hashed and then signed with Alice's private key. Okay, so that becomes one transaction record. The hash function, the cryptographic hash function used in Bitcoin network is SHA-256. Okay, so that's so this is SHA-2 with the output length of a hash function in 256 bits. Okay, so that's what it is used. Of course, you can use other hash function. For instance, you can use a SHA 512, you can use Whirlpool, or you can even use SHA-3. But nevertheless, that's what a transaction record would look like. So now, so you can receive payment from someone else. But then how can you play the game and earn and make Bitcoins by playing? In other words, by mining the Bitcoin network. So mining here is to collect a set of transactions from the Bitcoin network, and this set of transactions is referred to as a block. So you are presented with the current image or current Bitcoin network, because it is a blockchain of transactions. So you are going to find a set of collections, a set of transactions from this network, where this set of transactions or a block consists of a list of verified transactions, a hash of these transactions, a link to the previous transactions in the blockchain, and a proof that the transactions have been verified. Okay, so which means that you collect a block, and then you add the block to the blockchain. If it is successful, you will be awarded with a certain amount of Bitcoins. So that's how you make Bitcoins. I don't want to say money until people put real value to it. So it's just Bitcoins in a digital form. Okay, so so that's what mining means. Oops, sorry. All right. So once you obtain this block, you need to add this new block to the blockchain for a certain number of Bitcoins. Okay. So then, the miner also verifies the transactions in the new block by checking that the signatures work and no coins were spent twice in the block, right? So each block is a transaction. So it involves, as we said, in a transaction record, it has a certain units of Bitcoins. So you make sure those Bitcoins have not been spent twice. So these transactions are combined into a single hash value using a Merkle tree. So these transactions in one block, okay, will then be combined into one single value. So this is what a Merkle tree looks like. Here, see, you have a hash function, a hash value block 1, block 2, hash value block 3 plus B4, right? And then, so you merge them up by concatenate these two values, and hash again, you merge them up, and then hash again. Okay, so the most important part is the proof of work, right? So you have to show that I have found these blocks, or this set of transactions. I found a new block, and then I want to present a proof to it. So which means that to link the new block to the previous block in the blockchain, the transaction must contain a reference called proof of work, or POW, to the previous block, so that this new block will be linked to the previous block in the blockchain. A proof of work is a value that is very hard to generate to meet a certain requirement. but very easy to verify. Okay, so because it is very hard to generate, it makes the process of acquiring Bitcoins from the Bitcoin network immensely difficult. Hence, some people are willing to pay real money to acquire Bitcoins from someone who owned them. Okay, so then now Bitcoins have, the Bitcoins have real values, and it can be changed. They can be changed hands, and since there is no central organization governing it, and there is no exchange rates from one currency to the others, and so this is very convenient from that point of view. So now let's look at the proof of work details. A POWP for the new block, right? So you got a new block, you have to come up with a proof of work in order to put this new block into the blockchain. And this proof of work is not easy to get. Okay, so a POWP for the new block with a difficulty level of K is obtained as follows, where K is a positive integer. First, compute a double hash of a Merkle tree. So we let R be the root of the Merkle tree of the new block, and R prime the root of the Merkle tree of the previous block. So I want to link R to R prime, and P is a binary string. Okay, so P is a binary string. So we let H be a hash function. So what we want to compute is to compute a hash on R prime. Now remember, R is also a hash value. R prime is a hash value. And P here is a binary string that I want to find. So we obtain a hash and hash again, so that I obtain a fixed length value. So that's H. So there's a hash this and hash that we get. So this H is called a double hash because we hash on these three parameters, R prime, and P, by using H twice. So that's called a double hash. Oops, sorry. Don't know what's going on here. Going back. All right. So if H begins with K consecutive zeros, of course, this is not easy to get, then use H as the hash value of the new block and the number P as the proof. Only when this case, this binary string P is a proof. So which means that you got to try these value P in order to get a hash value with zero consecutive, I'm sorry, with K consecutive zeros in its prefix. So that becomes a proof. So then both values are included in the block. Okay, so if H does not begin with K consecutive zeros, then you need to select a new value of P and repeat. Go to step 1 and repeat. So that means when K is large, for example, when K is equal to 100, the miner may have to try, in the worst case, because you gotta try these many cases, at least 2 to the 100 cases, different values of P to find a proof. Well, that's only in the worst case, of course. In the worst case, in the sense, it means that maybe some of these proofs have already been, so you need to find so what you need to do is find a collection of transactions. You form a Merkle tree, that's R. You get the hash value of the Merkle tree of the root. And then you also need to, you look at a block, so an existing block, that's R prime. So I want to insert this new block into it. So what you need in order to be able to insert it, you need to find a binary value P so that so you do a double hash. That double hash contains K consecutive zeros as prefix. So this process is extremely difficult. So this is hard. On the other hand, if a proof is given, then it is easy to verify that the double hash value is equal to H. Okay, so verifying is easy. Okay, so when P is given, you have found it, and you can do this double hash very quickly, and then this H will contain K consecutive zeros in its prefix. Okay, so now I found there's a proof of work. Okay, so this mining is really hard to do, right? But let's say I found it after hard work. So now I want to add this new block to the blockchain. Okay, so the miner adds a new block by broadcasting it to the Bitcoin network, BN. By broadcasting, this means everybody sees it. Every player sees it. So when two miners each broadcast a new block, and one block is a subset of the other, right? Because it could happen. They just mine these transactions, and then so one may contain the other. So this could happen. Only the block with more transactions is kept. Okay, so this is very unfortunate for the other miner. So if he finds a block, but then some other person finds a block that contains this block as a subset, then his block cannot be used. But in rare cases, which means that when two blocks are identical, this is rare, but theoretically it could happen, then the block is split temporarily in the blockchain. Okay, when one of the four chains contains more transactions, this chain is kept. Okay, so this then will depend on further movement. Okay, so the miner then adds a new block using a special transaction called a Coinbase Transaction, which lists the miner as the recipient of a certain amount of Bitcoins as its reward, because now his work is successful. So I'm putting a new block into the chain, and I should get reward for my hard work. For instance, for each block added in successfully, 25 units of Bitcoins would be issued to the miner as his prize. Okay, that's it.
Okay, so
it's a Bitcoin. Okay.
Time is up, and so that concludes module 5. Are there any questions? All right then, so I'll see you next Monday. So bye-bye now.